The monster next door. We like to think we know what a monster looks like. We picture horns, claws, something lurking in the shadows of a dark alley. But the truth? The truth is far more unsettling. The monster doesn't live under your bed. It lives next door. It's the charming law student, the friendly construction contractor, the trusted family doctor. This is not a celebration. This is an autopsy of the human soul. We are going to look at the architects of pure systematic horror, the serial killers who didn't just take lives, but fundamentally broke the social contract. They are the ultimate betrayal of trust, the living proof that the most dangerous place in the world is often the one you feel safest in. We've compiled a list of the most infamous, the most brutal, the ones who earned their dark nicknames. We'll examine their methods, their madness, and the terrifying scale of their crimes. Let's start with the one who taught us that charm is just a weapon. But before we dive in, make sure you're subscribed. You won't want to miss what comes next. Ted Bundy, the Charismatic Void. Ted Bundy! He didn't need a spooky nickname. His weapon was his face. He was the handsome killer, the Charismatic Void. In the 1970s, he redefined the American nightmare, proving that evil doesn't wear a mask. Sometimes it wears a smile and a tweed jacket. Bundy's genius, if you can call it that, was his ability to exploit human empathy. He'd feign injury, his arm in a sling, or pose as a police officer, luring women into his car. They weren't afraid of him. They wanted to help him. That was his modus operandi, weaponized kindness. He confessed to killing at least 30 women between 1974 and 1978, though the real number is likely double that. But the sheer depravity of his crimes is what chills you. He didn't just kill, he brutalized, he decapitated, and in a final sickening act of disrespect, he would revisit the crime scenes to perform sexual acts on the decomposing bodies. His trial was a media circus. He represented himself, using his charm to manipulate the courtroom, the judge, and the public. He was a performance artist of psychopathy. But the performance ended on January 24, 1989, in Florida's electric chair. A fittingly clinical end for a man who treated human life with such cold, clinical contempt. Bundy used charm. But what happens when the monster hides behind something even more innocent? Hang on. The next one will bring you to the tip of your chair, because the next killer used the ultimate symbol of joy to mask his horror. John Wayne Gacy, the Killer Clown. John Wayne Gacy, the Killer Clown. It sounds like a bad horror movie, but it was terrifyingly real. Gacy was a respected construction contractor in Illinois, a pillar of his community. He even entertained children at parties and hospitals dressed as Pogo the Clown. But beneath the painted smile was a predator who murdered at least 33 teenage boys and young men between 1972 and 1978. His method was a grotesque parody of his public persona. He would lure victims to his home, often under the pretense of a magic trick, and then handcuff them. The magic trick ended with rape, torture, and strangulation. The sheer audacity of his crime is staggering. Most of his victims were buried right there, in the cramped, suffocating crawl space beneath his suburban house. A suburban home, a symbol of the American dream, turned into a mass grave. Gacy was convicted in 1980 and executed by lethal injection in 1994. But the image remains. The man who brought joy to children simultaneously buried their peers beneath his floorboards. It's a permanent, sickening reminder that the costume of normalcy is the monster's best disguise. Gacy buried his victims, but the next man didn't just hide the bodies, he tried to keep them. You won't believe the darkness that was hiding in his refrigerator. Jeffrey Dahmer, the Milwaukee Cannibal. Jeffrey Dahmer, the Milwaukee Cannibal. If Bundy was about manipulation and Gacy was about disguise, Dahmer was about possession. He didn't just want to kill his victims. He wanted to consume them, to keep them, to turn them into objects of his twisted desire. Between 1978 and 1991, Dahmer murdered 17 boys and young men. His crimes were a descent into a hellish landscape of necrophilia, dismemberment, and cannibalism. He wasn't just killing, he was experimenting with the boundaries of human depravity. His spree ended in July 1991, not by brilliant police work, but because an intended victim managed to escape and lead the police back to Dahmer's apartment. What the officers found was a scene ripped straight from a nightmare. Photographs of dismembered bodies, preserved body parts, and a human head in the refrigerator. Dahmer was found legally sane and received 16 life sentences, but his reign of terror ended not by the state, but by a fellow inmate in 1994, a brutal yet arguably fitting end for a man who showed such brutality to others. Dahmer taught us that the human mind is capable of creating its own private abattoir. Dahmer's crimes were intensely personal and confined. But what about the killers who operated on an industrial scale, turning entire regions into their hunting grounds? Hold your breath, because the next killer claimed up to 80 victims. Gary Ridgway, the Green River Killer. Gary Ridgway, the Green River Killer. His nickname is a geographical marker for his reign of terror. Ridgway preyed on the most vulnerable, prostitutes and runaways in Washington state throughout the 1980s and 90s. He was a man of staggering, almost unimaginable prolificacy. He claimed to have killed up to 80 women. When he finally pleaded guilty in 2003, it was to 48 murders, making him one of the most successful serial killers in U.S. history. His method was simple, brutal, and effective. Strangulation, often during sexual encounters. His victims were then dumped, discarded like trash, near the Green River or in remote wooded areas. Ridgway was the ghost in the mist, the monster who blended into the background. He was a painter at a truck company, a seemingly normal man who was systematically eradicating women from the margins of society. He received 48 consecutive life sentences. His legacy is a chilling testament to how institutional indifference can become a serial killer's greatest ally. The scale of Ridgway's crimes is horrifying, but the next two men operated on a scale that defies belief, targeting the most innocent among us, and they did it across continents. You won't believe the true count of the monster of the Andes. Luis Garavito, La Bestia. We now turn our attention south to a man whose victim count is so high it sounds like a statistical error. Luis Garavito, known as La Bestia, or the Beast. He terrorized Colombia in the 1990s, and his crimes were a systematic campaign against the most defenseless. Garavito confessed to murdering 140 boys and was convicted of killing 189 children. His victims, mostly boys aged 6 to 16, were lured with candy, money, or the promise of work. His depravity was absolute: rape, torture, and mutilation. To gain their trust, he often disguised himself as a monk or priest, earning him the sickening nickname El Cura. He was sentenced to 835 years in prison. Garavito is a stark, brutal reminder that evil often hides behind the cloak of false piety, preying on the innocence that society is supposed to protect. Garavito's count is staggering, but he is not the only beast of the Andes. Hold your breath, because the next monster's confession was even higher, and he is still out there. Pedro Alonso Lopez, Monster of the Andes. Pedro Alonso Lopez, the Monster of the Andes. Operating across Ecuador, Colombia, and Peru, Lopez confessed to the murders of more than 300 girls. While authorities could only confirm 110, the sheer scope of his claims is enough to curdle the blood. He preyed on girls aged 8 to 12, luring them with gifts or promises of toys. After strangling his victims, he often committed necrophilia. He was arrested in 1980, convicted of killing 110 girls in Ecuador, and served a mere 14 years in an Ecuadorian prison. And here is the final, sickening detail. He was released in 1998. His current status? Fugitive. A monster with a confirmed body count of over 100, walking free Lopez is the living nightmare that justice is often a cruel joke, and the monster always gets a second chance. We've seen the monster in the street, the monster in the suburbs, and the monster in the wilderness. But what about the monster in the most trusted place of all? You'll never believe this happened. The next killer wore a white coat and held the power of life and death in his hands. Harold Shipman, Dr. Death. Harold Shipman. Dr. Death. He was a British general practitioner, a man who swore an oath to do no harm. Instead, he became the most prolific healthcare serial killer in history. Shipman murdered his patients during routine home visits. His method was chillingly simple and effective, injecting them with lethal doses of diamorphine, then signing the death certificates, claiming natural causes. The betrayal of trust is absolute. A government inquiry estimated he killed about 250 people. Think about that. 250,000 lives extinguished by the man they trusted most with their health. He was convicted in 2000 of 15 murders, but the true scale of his crimes is a horrifying stain on the medical profession. Shipman taught us that the greatest power a monster can wield is the institutional authority that makes him unquestionable. Shipman used trust, but the next killer used architecture. Hold your breath, because the next chapter takes us to a hotel built specifically for murder. H. Holmes, the devil in the White City. H. Holmes, often dubbed America's first serial killer, or the devil in the White City. His story is a dark mirror to the optimism of the 1893 World's Fair in Chicago. Born Herman Webster Mudgett, Holmes built a hotel near the fairgrounds, later nicknamed the Murder Castle. This wasn't just a building, it was a weapon. It contained soundproof rooms, hidden gas lines, and secret chutes for disposing of bodies. He lured fairgoers and female employees into his labyrinth, killing them for insurance fraud or pure sadistic gratification. Holmes confessed to 27 murders, though some estimates suggest up to 200 victims. He was hanged in 1896. Holmes proved that true evil is not just impulsive, it is meticulously engineered. Holmes was a product of American capitalism and spectacle. But what happens when the monster is a product of a system that denies his very existence? You won't believe how Soviet ideology hampered the search for the Butcher of Rostov. Andrei Chikatilo, the Red Ripper. Andrei Chikatilo, the Butcher of Rostov, or the Red Ripper. He committed a series of sexual assaults, mutilations, and murders of women and children in the Soviet Union between 1978 and 1990. His crimes were horrific, involving stabbing, mutilation, cannibalism, and necrophilia. But what made his reign of terror so long was the system itself. Soviet ideology denied the existence of serial killers, claiming they were a decadent Western phenomenon. This political blindness severely hampered the investigation. Chikatilo was questioned and released multiple times. He eventually confessed to 56 murders and was convicted of 52. He was executed by firing squad in 1994. Chikatilo is a chilling example of how political dogma can create the perfect hunting ground for a monster. The Red Ripper was a product of the Cold War East. Now let's jump to the American West, where the next killer brought satanic panic to the suburbs. Hold your breath, because the Night Stalker is coming for you. Richard Ramirez, the Night Stalker. Richard Ramirez, the Night Stalker. A self-professed Satanist who terrorized California in 1984 and 1985. Ramirez didn't target a specific type. His victims ranged from children to elderly adults. His only pattern was the night itself. He would break into homes, murdering at least 13 people during his home invasions, sexually assaulting and beating survivors, and leaving pentagrams at the crime scenes as his calling card. He brought a random, terrifying chaos to the seemingly safe suburbs. His spree ended when a fingerprint led to his identification. He was captured not by police, but by a group of residents who recognized him from news reports and beat him until the police arrived. A moment of pure, raw community justice. Ramirez died on death row in 2013, a permanent reminder that the line between the safe suburban dream and a random, violent nightmare is terrifyingly thin. We've seen the charming killer, the clown, the cannibal, the doctor, and the ripper. But we saved the most monstrous, the most depraved. For last, you won't believe the sickening claims of the boogeyman. Albert Fish, the boogeyman. Hamilton Howard, Albert Fish. He had many nicknames. Gray Man, Werewolf of Wisteria, Brooklyn Vampire, and most fittingly, the Boogeyman. Fish was a sadistic pedophile and cannibal whose crimes stretch back to the early 20th century. His confirmed murder count is relatively low, but the nature of his crimes and his own sickening claims have cemented his place in the darkest corner of history. Fish claimed to have molested more than 400 children and tortured and killed several. His most infamous crime involved the abduction of 10-year-old Grace Budd in 1928. Years later, he sent the girl's mother a letter, a grotesque piece of correspondence describing in horrifying detail how he strangled, dismembered, and cannibalized her daughter. Fish was arrested in 1934 after investigators traced the stationery. He pleaded insanity but was declared sane and executed in the electric chair in 1936. Albert Fish is the ultimate terrifying proof that the darkest legends of childhood horror are sometimes based on the most repulsive reality, the betrayal of trust. We have walked through the darkest corners of human history. We have seen the monster in the street, the monster in the suburbs, and the monster in the most trusted places. These men, from the charming Bundy to the cannibalistic Fish, all share one thing: the systematic betrayal of trust. They didn't succeed because they were supernatural. They succeeded because they exploited the most fundamental human needs: the need for help, the need for safety, the need for a doctor, the need for a friend. So the next time you hear a true crime story, don't just look for the sensational details. Look for the moment of betrayal. Look for the moment when the mask slipped. Because that is the only way to truly understand the monster, and maybe, just maybe, the only way to spot the one standing right next to you. If you want more powerful, gripping, and unforgettable stories, you're in the right place. We've got plenty more waiting for you on the channel, so hit that like button and make sure you subscribe to stay with us on every new journey. Your support means everything. See you in the next one.